Sometimes the child standing alone in the rain is not waiting for a ride. Sometimes she is waiting for someone who makes the world feel safe again. The rain arrived without warning just after 3:30 on a chilly October afternoon, turning the streets of a quiet Chicago suburb into shimmering ribbons of gray. Parents hurried toward the elementary school entrance carrying umbrellas. Children laughed as they splashed through shallow puddles, and engines idled along the curb as families disappeared one by one into warm cars. Within minutes, the sidewalk had nearly emptied, leaving only one little girl standing beneath the awning with a pink backpack hugged tightly against her chest. 9-year-old Sophie Bennett glanced toward the parking lot every few seconds before lowering her eyes again. Her driver had texted that traffic was completely backed up because of an accident several miles away. Her mother had already apologized through a brief message, explaining that an emergency board meeting had gone longer than expected. Sophie quietly slipped the phone back into her backpack without replying. She had grown used to messages replacing hugs. Across the street, Daniel Foster finished lowering the hood of an old pickup truck outside his neighborhood repair garage. At 40 years old, life had taught him that engines usually gave warning signs before they failed, but people rarely did. As he wiped grease from his hands with a faded shop towel, his daughter Emily walked beside him carrying 2 paper cups of hot chocolate from the diner next door. "Dad," she said softly, "that girl is still standing there." Daniel followed her gaze. The little girl had not moved. Rain continued soaking the sidewalk beyond the school entrance while colder wind pushed scattered leaves across the empty crosswalk. "Maybe someone is coming," Daniel answered, though he noticed she had been alone for much longer than seemed normal. Emily watched quietly before speaking again. "Mom always said nobody should wait alone in the rain." Daniel smiled gently at the memory. "Your mom was usually right." He picked up one of the extra umbrellas customers often forgot inside the garage and crossed the street without hesitation. Sophie looked up as footsteps approached. Instead of seeing another impatient adult rushing past, she found a kind-faced mechanic holding an umbrella over both of them. "Hello," Daniel said with a calm smile. "You do not have to stand out here getting soaked." Sophie hesitated politely. "My driver is coming." "I believe you," Daniel replied. "But until then, would you like to stay warm inside my garage? My daughter is finishing her hot chocolate, and I think there is enough for one more cup." Sophie looked toward the small garage, where warm amber light spilled through the open doorway. She could hear quiet country music drifting outside and smell fresh coffee mixed with cinnamon from somewhere inside. It felt strangely inviting, nothing like the polished office buildings where she usually waited for her mother after work. "Will my mother know where I am?" she asked carefully. Daniel nodded. "You can call her the moment we step inside." After a brief pause, Sophie accepted the umbrella. Emily greeted her with an encouraging smile before taking her backpack. Together, they walked toward the glowing garage while rain continued falling behind them. None of the three realized that this ordinary autumn afternoon would quietly begin changing their lives forever, not through grand miracles or impossible fortune, but through something far rarer in a hurried world: the simple decision of one good person refusing to let a lonely child stand alone in the rain. The little repair garage welcomed Sophie with a warmth she had almost forgotten could exist outside her own imagination. Rain tapped steadily against the metal roof, while soft country music drifted from an old radio resting beside neatly arranged tools. The scent of fresh coffee mixed with cinnamon and warm chocolate filled the room, making the storm outside seem very far away. Emily placed a dry towel over Sophie's shoulders before handing her a steaming mug of hot chocolate. "It is a family recipe," she said proudly. "Dad says every rainy day deserves something warm." Sophie wrapped both hands around the mug, quietly absorbing the comforting heat. Daniel smiled gently before pointing toward the small office in the corner of the garage. "Your mother should know exactly where you are. You can use my phone if you would like." Sophie nodded gratefully and dialed the familiar number. Olivia Bennett answered almost immediately, her voice carrying both relief and concern. "Sophie, sweetheart, where are you?" Sophie explained everything calmly, telling her mother that a mechanic named Daniel had invited her inside to stay warm until someone could arrive. Olivia thanked Daniel sincerely over the phone and promised she was leaving the office as quickly as traffic allowed. After the call ended, Sophie placed the phone back on the desk with a quiet smile. She said she will be here as soon as she can. Daniel nodded. Then until she gets here, you are our guest. Emily disappeared into a nearby cabinet before returning with a colorful board game that looked well loved from years of family evenings. Do you want to play? She asked hopefully. Sophie hesitated for only a moment before smiling. I would like that. The three of them gathered around a small wooden table worn smooth by time and countless conversations. Laughter slowly replaced silence as the game unfolded. Emily celebrated every lucky roll of the dice, while Sophie began laughing freely each time Daniel pretended to be dramatically disappointed whenever he lost a turn. The sound surprised Sophie more than anyone else. She could not remember the last time she had laughed without worrying about homework, schedules, or waiting alone after school. Daniel never asked about expensive schools or important business meetings. Instead, he asked Sophie about her favorite books, whether she liked dogs or cats, and what she dreamed about becoming one day. I think I want to be an architect, she answered thoughtfully. I like buildings that make people feel welcome. Daniel smiled with quiet admiration. That sounds like a wonderful dream. The best places are usually designed by people who care how others feel. Sophie lowered her eyes toward the game board before speaking softly. Home should probably feel that way too. Daniel noticed the sadness hidden behind her words, but chose not to press further. Some stories needed patience before they were ready to be shared. Outside, the rain continued falling while headlights occasionally reflected across the wet street. Nearly 40 minutes later, a dark luxury vehicle finally turned into the parking lot. Olivia hurried through the rain carrying no umbrella, her professional composure disappearing the moment she saw Sophie safe inside the brightly lit garage. Sophie ran toward her mother with a relieved smile, and Olivia wrapped her in a long embrace before looking gratefully toward Daniel. She had expected to find a frightened little girl waiting alone after school. Instead, she found her daughter laughing over a half-finished board game beside a father and daughter who had treated a complete stranger with effortless kindness. Standing quietly inside the humble garage, Olivia realized that in less than 1 hour, two ordinary people had given her child something she had been unable to provide for a very long time. The simple feeling of belonging somewhere without having to earn it. The drive home that evening felt unusually quiet, but it was not the uncomfortable silence Olivia Bennett had grown accustomed to after exhausting workdays. Sophie sat beside her looking out the rain-covered window with a peaceful smile that had been missing for months. Every few minutes, she glanced down at the small paper napkin Emily had folded into the shape of a flower before placing it carefully inside her backpack as though it were something priceless. Olivia noticed without saying anything. She had spent years buying expensive gifts whenever guilt whispered that she had missed another family dinner or another school event. Yet one handmade paper flower seemed to mean more to her daughter than anything money had ever purchased. Did you have fun? Olivia finally asked as they stopped at a red light. Sophie nodded immediately. They laughed a lot. Olivia smiled gently. I noticed. Sophie looked toward her mother with quiet honesty. It felt different there. Different how? Sophie thought carefully before answering. Nobody was in a hurry. Those 4 simple words stayed with Olivia long after Sophie had fallen asleep that night. The following morning, she arrived at the headquarters of Bennett Healthcare before sunrise, but for the first time in years, the towering glass building felt strangely cold. Executives filled conference rooms discussing quarterly projections, expansion strategies, and investor expectations. Every conversation sounded important. Yet Olivia found herself remembering the little repair garage where an old radio, a board game, and 3 cups of hot chocolate had somehow created more peace than the most luxurious office she had ever owned. Later that afternoon, Sophie hesitated while getting into the family vehicle after school. Mom? She asked softly. Olivia turned from the driver's seat. Yes, sweetheart. Sophie lowered her eyes for a moment. Could we stop by Mr. Daniel's garage before we go home? Olivia looked surprised. Is something wrong? Sophie quickly shook her head. No, I just wanted to give Emily the friendship bracelet I finished last night. Olivia smiled. I think that is a wonderful idea. 20 minutes later, the familiar garage came into view beneath clear blue skies. The large door stood open while Daniel carefully finished replacing the tires on an older family sedan. Emily sat at the wooden workbench completing her homework exactly as she had the day before. When she looked up and saw Sophie climbing out of the vehicle, her face immediately brightened. You came back. Sophie smiled just as warmly. I said I wanted to bring you something. She handed Emily the colorful woven bracelet, and Emily carefully slipped it onto her wrist with genuine excitement. I am never taking this off. Daniel walked over after finishing his work, wiping his hands on a clean shop towel before greeting Olivia with the same relaxed kindness as before. Nice to see both of you again. Olivia smiled sincerely. We wanted to return something much more important than a towel and an umbrella. Daniel looked puzzled. What is that? Olivia glanced toward the two girls laughing together over another board game already spread across the familiar wooden table. Hope, she answered quietly. Daniel followed her gaze before smiling with quiet understanding. Neither of them realized it yet, but the little garage had already become the place where one lonely child no longer counted the minutes until someone arrived. Instead, she had begun hoping tomorrow would give her another reason to come back. Days quietly settled into an unexpected routine that none of them had planned, but all of them secretly treasured. Every Tuesday and Thursday after school, Olivia Bennett arranged her meetings so she could personally pick Sophie up before stopping at Daniel Foster's garage for half an hour. She told herself it was simply a convenient place to wait until traffic eased across the city, yet she knew the truth reached much deeper. The little garage had become the one place where her daughter smiled before anyone asked her to. Emily and Sophie quickly developed the effortless friendship only children seemed able to create. They built cardboard houses from old shipping boxes, colored pictures at the wooden workbench, and challenged Daniel to endless board games that he pretended not to understand simply to hear them laugh when they won. One cool Friday afternoon, Daniel finished replacing the battery in a customer station wagon, just as Olivia walked into the garage, carrying a paper bag filled with fresh sandwiches from a nearby bakery. I thought everyone deserved a proper lunch, she said with an easy smile. Daniel laughed softly. You are going to spoil this garage. Olivia looked around the modest building filled with neatly organized tools and family photographs. I think this place has already taught me more about life than most executive conferences ever have. While the children sat nearby drawing pictures together, Olivia and Daniel shared lunch at the familiar wooden table. Conversation flowed naturally between them. Olivia spoke honestly about the pressure of leading thousands of employees and the quiet guilt she carried whenever work stole another evening from Sophie. Daniel listened without interruption before answering gently. Children rarely remember how many hours we worked. They remember who was beside them when they needed someone. Olivia lowered her eyes, quietly absorbing every word. Sometimes I worry I am failing her. Daniel shook his head kindly. The fact that you worry tells me you are trying. Love is not measured by perfection. It is measured by showing up again tomorrow. Before Olivia could respond, Sophie and Emily rushed over carrying a large sheet of drawing paper. We made something, Emily announced proudly. The picture showed two little girls standing between a repair garage and a tall office building, holding hands beneath a bright rainbow. Sophie pointed toward the two adults drawn nearby. That is Mr. Daniel, and that is Mom. Olivia smiled warmly. It is beautiful. Emily grinned. It is not finished yet. Daniel looked curious. What is missing? Sophie hesitated for a moment before answering honestly. A family always needs everyone together. The garage became completely quiet. Neither Daniel nor Olivia knew what to say because the innocence of her words carried more truth than either adult was prepared to face. Daniel finally smiled and gently placed the drawing on the wall beside the family photographs. Then we will leave a little space, he said softly. Sometimes the best stories are still being written. Olivia looked at the drawing for several silent seconds before meeting Daniel's eyes. She realized that without promises, without expectations, and without anyone trying to force the future, something remarkable had already begun. Her daughter no longer counted success by expensive vacations or perfect birthdays. She counted it by ordinary afternoons inside a small neighborhood garage where kindness was never scheduled, laughter was never rushed, and every person who walked through the door was welcomed as though they already belonged. Summer arrived quietly, bringing longer afternoons filled with warm sunshine that stretched across the streets surrounding Daniel Foster's little repair garage. What had once been an unexpected stop after school had slowly become part of Sophie's happiest routine. She no longer asked whether they could visit the garage. Instead, she simply smiled whenever Olivia Bennett turned the car toward the familiar street, already knowing exactly where they were going. Emily would be waiting with another board game, another drawing idea, or another adventure created from nothing more than imagination and kindness. Daniel often watched the two girls from beneath the hood of an old truck, smiling to himself as their laughter drifted through the open garage door. It reminded him that healing rarely announced its arrival. It simply appeared one ordinary afternoon and quietly decided to stay. One Saturday morning, Daniel organized a small picnic beside the nearby community lake, where Emily loved feeding ducks and collecting smooth stones along the shoreline. Olivia accepted the invitation after rearranging an important meeting, something she would never have considered only a few months earlier. Sophie spent the entire drive talking excitedly about sandwiches, homemade lemonade, and the sketchbook she planned to bring so she could draw the lake. The afternoon unfolded with effortless joy. Daniel grilled simple hamburgers while Emily and Sophie competed to see who could skip a stone the farthest across the water. Olivia sat beneath the shade of a large maple tree, watching them together. She noticed how naturally Daniel encouraged both girls equally, never making Sophie feel like a guest and never allowing Emily to feel overlooked. Every small gesture carried quiet fairness and genuine care. Later, while the girls searched for wildflowers nearby, Olivia and Daniel walked slowly along the peaceful shoreline. Gentle waves touched the rocks as birds drifted across the clear blue sky. Olivia broke the comfortable silence first. "I have spent years trying to give Sophie everything she could ever need," she admitted softly. "The better I became at my job, the more I realized I was missing moments I could never buy back." Daniel looked across the water before answering. "Children remember moments much longer than presents." Olivia nodded thoughtfully. "She laughs differently now." Daniel smiled. "She feels safe." Those two words settled deeply into Olivia's heart. At that very moment, Sophie came running toward them, holding a handful of tiny white flowers she had gathered beside the lake. Without thinking, she rushed directly to Daniel and slipped her small hand into his. "Dad," she said, excitedly before stopping in complete silence. Her eyes grew wide as she realized what she had called him. A blush spread across her face, and she quickly looked down. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I did not mean." Daniel gently knelt until they were looking into each other's eyes. His expression never changed. There was no surprise, no embarrassment, only warmth. "You never have to apologize for feeling safe," he said quietly. Sophie smiled with tears shining gently in her eyes before wrapping her arms around him. Olivia watched the moment from only a few feet away, her own eyes filling with emotion she could no longer hide. She understood that her daughter had not been trying to replace anyone. She had simply spoken the word her heart had quietly been searching for. As the afternoon sun reflected across the peaceful lake, and Emily happily joined the embrace with cheerful laughter, Olivia realized that family was no longer something defined only by the past. Sometimes it was something gently built through patience, kindness, and the ordinary courage to keep showing up for one another every single day. Several peaceful weeks passed after the afternoon by the lake, yet the quiet happiness surrounding Daniel Foster, Emily, Olivia Bennett, and Sophie seemed to grow stronger with every ordinary day they shared. Summer slowly faded into early autumn once again, and the familiar repair garage remained filled with laughter, homework spread across the wooden workbench, and the comforting aroma of fresh coffee drifting through the open doors each afternoon. Daniel often thought life had finally settled into the gentle rhythm every parent hoped to give a child. Then one Monday morning, Olivia received a phone call that quietly changed everything. She remained standing beside the large windows of her executive office long after the conversation had ended, holding a folder that contained the opportunity every business magazine had predicted she would eventually receive. A national healthcare organization had invited Bennett Healthcare to merge with its operations, making Olivia the chief executive officer of one of the largest medical technology companies in the country. The opportunity would transform her career forever. There was only one condition. The headquarters would relocate to New York within 3 months. That afternoon, Olivia drove to Daniel's garage without saying a word about the offer. Sophie and Emily were already sitting together building a model bridge for a school science project, while Daniel carefully repaired the brakes on an older family sedan. He noticed the thoughtful expression on Olivia's face before she even stepped inside. "You look like someone carrying more than a briefcase today," he said gently. Olivia smiled faintly, but did not answer immediately. After the girls became absorbed in their project, She quietly explained everything. Daniel listened without interrupting, his attention focused entirely on her words rather than the extraordinary title being offered. When she finished, silence settled naturally between them. Finally, Daniel asked only one question. What does Sophie think? Olivia looked down at the floor. I have not told her yet. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Then maybe the first opinion you need is the one that loves you without caring about your job title. Those simple words stayed with Olivia throughout the evening. After dinner, she invited Sophie onto the back porch where autumn leaves drifted gently through the cool air. She carefully explained the opportunity, describing the new city, the larger company, and everything that could change. Sophie listened quietly until her mother finished. For several long moments, she said nothing. Then she looked toward the stars beginning to appear above the neighborhood. Would Emily and Mr. Daniel come too? She asked softly. Olivia felt her heart tighten. No, sweetheart. They would stay here. Sophie lowered her eyes and wrapped both hands around the warm mug of cocoa resting on her lap. Can I ask you something? Olivia reached over and gently squeezed her daughter's hand. You can ask me anything. Sophie spoke so quietly that the evening breeze almost carried her words away. Can families stay together even if they are not born together? Tears quietly filled Olivia's eyes before she could answer. She finally understood that her daughter was not asking about moving to another city. She was asking whether the place where she finally felt safe would disappear once again. Later that night, Olivia sat alone in her living room, looking at the signed merger documents resting on the coffee table beside the colorful friendship bracelet Emily had made for Sophie months earlier. One represented the greatest professional achievement of her life. The other reminded her of the family her daughter had quietly found. For the first time in many years, success and happiness no longer seemed to be walking in the same direction. The following morning dawned beneath a quiet gray sky, and Olivia Bennett arrived at the headquarters of Bennett Healthcare carrying a decision that felt heavier than any business proposal she had ever signed. Executives gathered around the polished conference table with confident smiles, expecting an announcement that would transform the company forever. The merger documents rested neatly before her, ready for a single signature. Every financial projection promised extraordinary success. Every advisor believed accepting the offer was the obvious choice. Olivia looked around the room before quietly closing the folder. Before we continue, she said calmly, I need to tell you that I have reached a different decision. A respectful silence settled over the conference room. Several board members exchanged puzzled glances, waiting for an explanation. Olivia folded her hands together and spoke with a peaceful confidence that surprised even herself. A company succeeds because of people, not because of addresses. I cannot ask thousands of families to leave the community that helped build this organization simply because a larger opportunity appeared somewhere else. One director gently reminded her of the financial advantages. Another mentioned national recognition. Olivia listened carefully before smiling. There comes a moment when leadership is measured by what we choose to protect instead of what we choose to gain. The room remained silent for several long seconds before the chairman slowly nodded. Then your decision is final? Olivia answered without hesitation. Yes, we are staying. Here. That afternoon, she drove directly to Daniel Foster's garage. Autumn sunlight poured through the open doorway while Emily and Sophie laughed together over another board game at the familiar wooden table. Daniel looked up from repairing an older pickup truck and immediately recognized the peaceful expression on Olivia's face. You decided, he said softly. Olivia nodded. I did. Daniel washed his hands before joining her outside, where cool air carried the scent of fallen leaves through the quiet neighborhood. Was it difficult? He asked. Olivia looked toward the garage where the girls could still be heard laughing together. Harder than any business decision I have ever made. She paused before smiling gently. And somehow easier than I expected. Daniel quietly waited. He had learned that meaningful conversations often needed space before the most important words arrived. Olivia looked at him with complete honesty. I realized something after talking with Sophie. She was never asking me to choose between my career and another city. She was asking whether I would choose the life where she finally felt at home. Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment before answering. Children have a remarkable way of finding the real question. Olivia laughed softly through grateful tears. You have been answering those questions without realizing it since the day you walked across that street with an umbrella. At that moment, Sophie and Emily rushed outside, carrying the unfinished drawing they had made weeks earlier. The picture still showed the garage, the office building, and the rainbow connecting both worlds. Emily held up a new box of colored pencils. "We finally know how to finish it." Sophie smiled hopefully before looking at her mother. "Can we?" Olivia nodded warmly. "I think it is time." The two girls carefully drew the four of them standing together beneath the rainbow, then added one small house beside the garage with bright windows glowing warmly inside. Daniel quietly studied the finished drawing before smiling. "It looks beautiful." Sophie looked up with the simple certainty only a child could carry. Because everyone finally stayed. Olivia felt tears quietly fill her eyes once again, not because she had sacrificed something valuable, but because she had finally understood that the greatest achievements in life were never listed on a resume. They were found in the ordinary places where love quietly chose to remain. The weeks that followed seemed to unfold with a quiet grace that no one wanted to disturb. Every afternoon after school, Sophie and Emily could be found sitting together at the familiar wooden workbench inside Daniel Foster's garage, finishing homework, building small craft projects, or laughing over another board game, while the comforting sounds of tools and soft country music filled the room. Olivia Bennett often arrived after work carrying fresh bread, homemade soup, or coffee for everyone, never because anyone expected it, but because sharing simple meals had quietly become one of her favorite parts of every day. Daniel noticed the change in her immediately. She no longer glanced constantly at her phone or apologized for being late. Instead, she listened carefully, smiled more easily, and seemed completely present in every conversation. One crisp Saturday morning, Olivia invited Daniel, Emily, and Sophie to visit the new community children's center that Bennett Healthcare had recently completed. Unlike the impressive corporate buildings she had overseen in the past, this place had been designed for families. Bright classrooms welcomed children from every neighborhood, reading corners overflowed with books, and colorful art studios encouraged imagination instead of competition. As they walked through the building together, Sophie gently squeezed her mother's hand. "It feels warm," she whispered. Olivia smiled. "That was the most important thing I wanted people to feel." Daniel looked around thoughtfully before answering. "You built a place where children know they matter." Olivia turned toward him with grateful eyes. "I learned that from watching your garage." Later that afternoon, a small gathering welcomed volunteers, teachers, employees, and local families into the new center. Olivia stood before the audience with quiet confidence, not delivering a speech about business achievements or financial growth, but about people. "Success is often measured by numbers," she began calmly. "This year taught me that the strongest foundations are built with kindness, patience, and ordinary moments shared with others." She paused before looking toward Daniel and the two girls standing together near the back of the room. Sometimes the people who change our lives never ask for recognition. They simply choose compassion when it would have been easier to walk away. A peaceful silence settled across the audience before warm applause slowly filled the room. Daniel lowered his eyes with humble embarrassment while Emily smiled proudly beside him. Sophie reached for his hand without thinking, and he gently squeezed hers with the same reassuring warmth she had felt on that rainy afternoon months earlier. After the celebration ended, several teachers thanked Daniel for inspiring the center's welcoming atmosphere, although he quietly insisted the credit belonged to everyone who had worked together. Olivia watched every conversation with quiet admiration. He accepted appreciation exactly as he offered kindness, without seeking attention or expecting anything in return. As evening approached, the four of them walked outside beneath a sky painted with soft shades of orange and gold. Sophie looked from Daniel to her mother before speaking with complete sincerity. "I used to think families happened by luck." Emily smiled curiously. "What do you think now?" Sophie looked at both adults before answering. "I think families happen when people keep choosing each other every day." Neither Daniel nor Olivia could find words worthy of that simple truth. They only smiled as they continued walking side by side, realizing that the little girl who had once stood alone in the rain had quietly become the heart that reminded them all what home truly meant. 1 year passed almost unnoticed, measured not by business reports or changing seasons, but by ordinary mornings that quietly became treasured memories. Daniel Foster still unlocked the repair garage before sunrise each day, greeting every customer with the same gentle smile that had welcomed a lonely little girl on a rainy afternoon. Long ago, Emily still completed her homework at the familiar wooden workbench while the comforting aroma of fresh coffee drifted through the garage and soft country music filled the air. Some things never changed because they had always been enough. Olivia Bennet no longer hurried through every hour chasing another meeting or another impossible deadline. She had learned that the greatest opportunities were often waiting in the moments people were tempted to overlook. Most afternoons, she arrived at the garage carrying fresh bread from the neighborhood bakery or a basket filled with fruit for everyone to share. She was still an exceptional chief executive officer, but now she protected family dinners with the same determination she once reserved for board meetings. Sophie and Emily had become inseparable. School projects, birthday celebrations, weekend picnics, and ordinary afternoons naturally belonged to all four of them. One Saturday morning, the girls carefully carried a large framed picture into the garage office. Daniel looked up from repairing an older pickup truck and smiled. "What are the two artists creating today?" Emily proudly placed the frame against the wall while Sophie adjusted it until it hung perfectly beside the family photographs. The painting showed a rainy sidewalk, a small repair garage glowing with warm light, two little girls standing together beneath one umbrella, and two adults smiling nearby. Above the picture, Sophie had written a single sentence in careful handwriting. "Home is where someone opens the door for you." Daniel quietly studied the painting while Olivia stood beside him with tears gently filling her eyes. "I think she finally found the words," Olivia whispered. Daniel smiled warmly. "I think she found them a long time ago. She just needed the courage to write them down." Later that afternoon, the community gathered outside the Children's Center for its annual family celebration. Neighbors, teachers, volunteers, and employees laughed together beneath strings of warm lights, while children filled the sidewalks with games and music. During the evening, a local reporter recognized Olivia and asked one final question. "After everything your company has accomplished this year, what achievement makes you the proudest?" Olivia looked across the crowd until she found Daniel helping two children repair the loose wheel on a little wagon, while Emily and Sophie laughed beside him. She smiled with complete peace before answering. "The greatest success of my life never happened inside an office. It began the day one kind father decided that no child should stand alone in the rain." The reporter lowered the microphone because nothing more needed to be said. As the celebration ended, gentle rain began falling once again, soft enough that nobody rushed to leave. Sophie stepped into the rain with Emily, lifting her face toward the sky exactly as she had dreamed of doing without fear. Daniel opened the old garage door while warm golden light spilled across the wet pavement. Olivia quietly slipped her hand into his, and neither of them spoke because silence sometimes carried the deepest promises. Together they watched the two girls laugh beneath the summer rain, knowing that family had not arrived through perfect plans or extraordinary fortune. It had been built one ordinary act of kindness at a time. And every time rain touched the roof of that little garage again, it gently reminded them all that the strongest homes are not always the ones we are born into. They are the ones where love quietly chooses to stay. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.